Right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we are joined by my friend Elizabeth Petters, who is the co host of the Deconstructed Mamas podcast, all around amazing human being. So, Liz, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love this tough stuff, so I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So, according to your Twitter account, you also go by another name around your house, right? Mr. Skinny Legs. Is that true?
My daughter has entered this phase where she just wants to insult me. So
Yes.
if I don't let her do something or whatever, she wants to insult me. And so the other day, she called me Mr. Skinny Legs, and I had to go in the other room and laugh because it was just so random and so funny. So she's creatively verbally abusing me on the daily.
That's the
But
best. Yeah. Sometimes I wonder, where do they pick this stuff up from? Because my daughter will say something. I'm like, what?
I
Where
have
did you
no
get that
idea.
from?
I have no idea. It's the most random things. It's so
It's
funny.
like I'm proud of you because that's a really good dig, but at the
Right,
same
yes.
time, you did it to me, and I don't know how I
It's
feel
so
about
true.
it.
It's so true.
So funny. So what I want to do today is I want to dig a little bit into your story of deconstruction and reconstruction and all the things because your story is, I think, really unique for a number of different reasons. And the vulnerability that you bring to your story when you share it with others on your podcast and social media, I think is really outstanding. And so maybe we could just start a little bit with your story. Tell us a little bit about Liz Petters. Take us into your spiritual story. However deep you want to go down the rabbit hole, I'm happy to follow. I'm not scared to go down there, but of where you were and where you are, and a little bit of the journey that took you from there to here.
Yeah, I love rabbit holes.
Yes.
Esther, my co-host, keeps me on track usually when we're interviewing other people, but I always end up down some rabbit hole with them. Um, so I'm sure we will go there. So
Wonderful.
I grew up in a pretty strict evangelical home.
Hmm.
Most of you probably know my dad, Pete Enns, and he shared a lot about his story and how he's grown. So when I was little, he was still largely in that conservative church and kind of conservative lifestyle, and so our as kids, we were raised that way.
Hmm.
Um, so I grew up kind of knowing your typical Bible stories and but I remember always kind of having questions. So I think as a little kid I was already deconstructing.
You were
Didn't
that
really
kid.
understand how I was totally that kid.
Yeah.
Didn't really understand why, how God was so loving if, he was drowning like Egyptians in the Red Sea and
Mhm.
Noah's Ark was happening, right? Like these things didn't make sense to
Such
me.
a cute Bible
So
story. Yeah.
just really sweet. Yeah, one that I definitely will be reading my children, not. Um, but so I just always had questions. And looking back, I'm like, gosh, that was really probably anxiety provoking for me as a
Mm.
kid to be questioning some of those things. Um, so I really developed an anxiety disorder pretty young, and whether that's kind of faith-based or genetics or probably a whole host of things altogether, I'm a very
Mhm.
empathetic person, so all of those things kind of came together. And I spent a lot of my younger life just in a lot of emotional pain,
Mm.
and just really, really struggling. And as I hit my teen years, I was still much in this kind of evangelical setting, and I was praying very hard that God
Mhm.
would take my pain away, that I would somehow be fixed. And it led to a lot of disappointment in my relationship with God because I was like,
Mhm.
why is God letting me suffer like this? I don't want to be alive anymore. Really, just a really, really hard time for
Mm.
me. And so I don't think I really realized it, but I was largely deconstructing, I think, at that point.
Mm.
Um, but in my head, I'm thinking I don't have enough faith. I'm not praying enough, or I'm not,
Yeah. You're not
I'm
hitting the
not
right
doing what
buttons
I
on the
need to
vending
do. I'm not
machine.
hitting the right, but yeah, exactly. Something's not right because God would
Yeah.
save me if I was doing the right things. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that contributed a lot to anxiety. And so fast forward, I'm 16. I developed a pretty severe eating disorder, stopped going to school. Just anxiety just took over my life, anxiety and depression. And so
Mm.
my parents ended up sending me to a wilderness camp and then to a therapeutic boarding school. And around that time, I started to really realize my faith was important to me, but not a lot of the theologies that I had learned. So
Mm.
I kind of started to unpack this idea that I believed in God, right, or some divine power,
Mm.
and I liked believing in that,
Mm.
but I no longer was subscribing to the idea of hell as a literal place of torment. I no longer felt like some of the things that I had learned and grown up with made sense for the
Mhm.
God that I was experiencing. And so that really kind of started this journey of deconstructing. I went to a small Christian college. I was like, wow, I don't fit in here at all, right? Like, I don't belong here.
Right.
So it just kind of like started kind of tumbling after each other. But it's really probably been in the last 5 years or so that I've really, we left our church,
Mhm.
and obviously I started this podcast with Esther. And so I've become more and more vocal about some of my deconstruction journey and some of the things that I believe and don't believe. And so
Mhm.
it's created this sort of scenario where people are like, oh, we now, like, I'm exposed, right? Like, now
Right.
people know where I am and what I think and what I believe. And so, it's a lot more out in the open than it was. But I really think largely I've been doing this for most of my life.
Mm. Yeah. So the anxiety piece, can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Because specifically about reflecting back on your life, like how have you seen connections between your anxiety, maybe some of the things that you were taught regarding God? And I asked that because, as I mentioned in our email exchange, like I don't think people who didn't grow up in an evangelical, more fundamentalist setting grasp how traumatizing some of the things that kids are told about God that adults just think, wow, it's just the way that it is. I mean, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But you talk about like Noah's Ark, right? And about all these people drowning, and talk about hell and people burning forever. Like that's traumatizing things for kids. So like what did that anxiety look like for you as a kid as you look back on it? And how did it kind of carry its way into adulthood?
Yeah. It's interesting because I actually just in the last couple of years have really started to realize the connection between my faith and my anxieties,
Hmm.
and my faith and just kind of who I am as a person. One of the main things I think that's contributed to my anxiety is this kind of idea of dying to self
Hmm.
and not knowing yourself at all, because you are not important, right?
Hmm.
Like, the only thing that's important is God and loving other people, and you sacrifice yourself on that altar forever
Yep.
and ever and ever.
Yep.
And so now, right at 32, I have two kids, and I'm like, I don't know how to love myself or take care of myself, or if I'm even worthy of those things, right?
Yeah.
And that's so detrimental. Because even with things just as small as like fueling my body, right?
Hmm.
Resting my body,
Hmm.
um, all of those things, I don't know how to do them, really.
Yeah.
And it might sound extreme to kind of like put that all on my faith journey, but
Hmm.
so much of it is because my entire life I was just taught that I was a sinner, right? Like, I did not know what I needed and what I wanted.
Yep.
Most desires that I had were evil,
Yep.
right? And so there's this lack of connection with self. And that has been huge for me. That's
Mhm.
probably like the number one main thing that I've carried from my faith that's been really, really harmful.
Yeah.
Um, and there's obviously there's kind of the more obvious things like hell,
Hmm.
right? Like, how traumatizing is that to grow up constantly wondering if you're going to end up burning forever in with some evil guy with horns,
Yep.
and as a kid, right? Like, some of you guys might know, it's kind of saying the prayer every night before bed because you're afraid that you didn't say it right, and you got to
Yep.
say it right so that you don't end
Yep.
up in hell.
Yep.
And you have to save your friends, right? Like, what a
Hmm.
lot of pressure on like an 8-year old to go to school and witness to her friends, because she doesn't want her friends to end up in hell.
Yep.
Like, she wants them to end up in heaven with her. And so it's just a lot, there's a lot of pressure there, and a lot of fear.
Yeah.
A lot of fear. And like you said, there's Bible stories that kind of corroborate those fears. You know Abraham and Isaac,
Hmm.
where Abraham's like sacrificing Isaac on this altar, and as a kid you're like, okay, so if my parents follow God enough,
Right.
they could kill me, right?
Yep.
Or as an older person myself, saying like, okay, well, if I love God enough, I'd be willing to do anything for him,
Yep.
even if
Yep.
it's hurting someone I like. That is so messed up.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could really forever, I think, in terms of how these little things have affected me. But the main thing that I'm learning is this sort of idea of dying to self
Hmm.
and not knowing myself has been incredibly detrimental. And as I've gone on this journey of finding myself, I feel like I've found God. And I'm realizing that like God is like within me, right? This like
Yeah.
all loving being is like within me. And so when I seek myself, it kind of comes full circle and I find myself more grounded and you
Yeah.
know, but I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things to talk about in terms of like traumatizing things growing up with church and God and school. Like, I went to a private Christian school. And so we had in sixth grade, I was what, like 11, we did a whole segment. I'll never forget, it was like 3 or 4 months on the book of Revelation. And
Oh my
first of
gosh.
all, yeah, I mean, and it was like, it's presented like as a left behind kind of scenario. So like this is the mentality that the teacher was coming at it from. And I never forget, we watched this movie from, I think it was made like in the 70s. It was called, I don't remember what it was called, but the song in it was "You've Been Left Behind," and it was like this whole thing about like how, like a wife wakes up and her husband's gone, you've been left behind, like you wish you had more
Oh my
time,
gosh.
you wish you could go back, and like I remember literally waking up in the middle of the night having nightmares, but I was afraid to tell my parents because I was afraid that, well, maybe my parents aren't saved, and if they know that I'm upset, they'll just tell me they are and it won't be true. And
Hmm.
so then they're going to end up in hell, or Jesus is going to come back and he's going to take me, but not them. So I have to try to figure out how can I like magically go around the system to try to figure out if they're saved or not. Like these are the things going in my head, like while I'm lying in
Wow.
bed as an 11-year-old. And then I grew up I felt like I had like real attachment issues. Like I'm always afraid that like people are going to leave me, like I'm going to be left by
Hmm.
myself. And like, I feel like with all the work I've done, I feel like a lot of it goes back to those moments of really being told and made to be afraid that like, if I don't get these people saved, I'm going to spend eternity without them. And somehow I'm going to be happy about it because I'm going to go to heaven and heaven's this great
Oh,
place where everybody's smiling. And I guess it's not going to bother me that much. It's all so confusing, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's so confusing. And I think too, like my daughter she's 5, so she's really
Mhm,
asking a lot of questions right now about things.
mhm,
And you know, we've chosen not to read the Bible to our kids and we don't really talk about Bible stories. That's just kind
mhm.
of like what we've
Same
you know,
here.
we just don't feel like the Bible's age appropriate. So we
Mhm,
have not like done that. But my daughter asks a lot of questions about God because we do talk about God and we do
mhm,
talk about Jesus because I still
mhm.
identify very much as Christian. We have a nativity. My daughter's obsessed with baby Jesus. She carries
Yep.
him around, whatever. So
Us
she
too.
asks these questions.
Yeah.
She asked these questions, and you know, if I would say to my daughter, she asked me the other day, you know, if when I go to heaven, will you be there with me? Right?
Mhm,
She asks me. And I
mhm.
cannot imagine saying to her, well, we both have to say the prayer and we both have to ask Jesus in our heart or we're not going to be. I'm like, what the? Like, no way. I'm saying to her, like, absolutely. Like, I believe that we will be together forever. What does
Yeah,
that mean? I have no idea. Like, what is, you know what I mean? Does that mean that we're matter in a different dimension? Does that mean, like, I don't know what heaven is, right?
yeah,
But I believe that. And so that's what I share with her. And I just can't imagine giving her an answer, an adult answer, you know what I mean,
yeah,
to such a big question. But that is what you and I and others like us were getting as children, these huge adult answers that were terrifying.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're having the similar kind of conversations with our daughter because she'll ask some questions like about heaven and she'll ask about like where is heaven and things like that. And I've been
Mhm.
going like the route of how Jesus says in the Gospels, I forget which gospel it is, but he says like heaven is all around you. Then there's that line in the
Mm,
Gospel of Thomas that heaven is within you. And so I've been telling her, I said,
mm,
I was like, I don't know where heaven is. I don't know what it is. I said, but I believe that it's all around us and it's within us. And I said,
mm,
like, we lost her great grandma a couple years ago. We've lost some of our pets and things like that over the years. So we talk about, she's like, well, if heaven's all around me within me, does that mean that like great grandma is within me? And I said, I think so. I think there's a part of great grandma that
mm.
lives within you. I said, I think there's a part of great grandma that's
Yeah.
all around you. And I think that it's like those kind of things I think are so comforting to a child. And like you said, like I can't imagine saying to her, yeah, I don't know, like it depends if great grandma said the prayer, that kind of thing. Like it's just so,
Right.
but like that was so normal to me growing up that that's what we were told. And I'm just realizing how difficult it is. So to your point, I mean, talking to kids about this stuff, I think is super important. I think it's important to think through it.
Yeah. Well, I love how you said I think and I believe, right?
Yeah.
Like even just putting that preface on something, like I say that a lot, like this is what I believe,
Yep.
Lila,
Mhm.
right? Or like what do you think about this? Like this is what I believe, but what do you think about heaven?
Yep.
Is so important because, as a child being able to think things through for yourself and not have things just kind of dumped on you
Yeah.
is just really really super important.
Yeah. It's hard because, I mean, coming from the world we came from, it was like a world of answers. And so now
Yes.
I find myself having to
Mhm.
check myself because, like, she'll ask me a question, and I'm like, "Crap. Like, what am I gonna say? Like, how am I gonna answer this?" Like, I'm thinking about my theology books, I'm thinking about this and that. Then there's a part of me that says, "Wait a minute, like, it's okay to say, I don't know, you know? Like, what do
Mhm.
you think?" And kinda put it back on her. I think it's okay to have those conversations, and that's something that in this new life that I'm living and evolving into, like, that's a normal part of things, but in the past, like, that would have been a no-no. Then why do I have all these degrees? Why did I go to school? Why did I read all this stuff? And like, if I don't have the answers, if I
Right.
can't answer a 5-year-old's question, what do I really know about my faith? So yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
All right. So another question I had for you, and you might have talked about this somewhere. I'm not sure if you mentioned this on your podcast or maybe you've written it somewhere, but you probably have. But I have no idea what you're going to say. But I'm really curious about kind of the way that you and your dad have interacted through this whole process, because you've mentioned in other places that you guys kind of started being maybe more vocal about things, kind of like or somewhere around the same time, or maybe you first, him first. I don't really know the timeline, but you guys are both kind of on the same journey. So I'm wondering, like, what has that been like for you to have a parent who is on a similar journey and who is an accomplished Bible scholar? Like, has that been a help to you? Because I imagine, and I could be off base, like I'm making a massive assumption, but like I imagine that it would make you feel maybe a little bit less lonely, or at least a little bit less crazy, to know that like somebody else who has all this knowledge, has these degrees, done this stuff, is asking the same kinds of questions as you. Like, what has that dynamic been like for you and him?
Yeah. I mean, I do not take for granted that I have a parent who is deconstructing.
Hmm.
I mean, so many of the people that I talk to and friends of mine, their parents are just not on the same page. They've had to cut their relationship with their parents, or they're just kind of walking through this really, shallow relationship with them because that's all they
Yeah.
can do. So
Yeah.
I'm very, very thankful that, my dad is who he is and that we are able to have a lot of conversations about what we think and feel. And I've also learned a lot from him,
Hmm.
obviously, right? He knows some stuff. And so I've
He
learned
has
some
the
things
God
from
ordained
him.
podcast, the only one.
Well, he does. I mean, we're catching up to him, but
Right.
for now.
Enjoy
So
it while it lasts, Pete.
enjoy while it lasts, feet. Yeah, I tell him that all the time. So I mean, I am really thankful.
Hmm.
It's been interesting because I think the biggest thing has been like my dad, obviously growing up, we were parented in this sort of specific direction, and then watching the way that things have changed for him, or
Hmm.
more obviously changed for him, has been really interesting. And part of our journey has, I think, been, I don't want to speak for my dad, but like him being able to kind of realize why he did things the way that he did, and then allow himself to evolve and not kind of shame himself for the ways that he had parented us before, or the
Mm.
things that he had maybe introduced us to, or whatever. um which I think is just in a really important like piece of it, because I couldn't really talk openly about some of the pain that I've been in, right,
Mm.
from being a part of like an evangelical church, if my dad wasn't really able to kind of own some of that for himself. And so that's been
Yeah.
really important for me. I mean, obviously, I'm an open book. I talk about stuff. I don't think I have a filter really. So I just talk about whatever I want to talk about, and to be able to do that, and know that my dad is able to handle that has been like
Mm.
really huge for me.
Mm.
But we do my dad and I both have kind of fallen into this same area. I'm very like interested in the idea of faith and deconstruction and people finding healing and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's kind of cool in that way too. Like we've sort of fallen into the same like profession, I guess, if you will.
Hmm.
Which has been just a really cool like bond that we've had. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, no,
it's
for
pretty
sure. And
cool.
that's the assumption I was making. And I'm also curious, like, Are there what have been some like the bigger topics that you've had discussions with him about?
Mm,
Like, has there been like an instance where it was like neither one of you really knew where to land on a particular issue, where you just kind
mm.
of like, I don't know, like for instance, hell kind of thing? Like, did you ever have like a conversation about like a major doctrine or theology that you were both kind of hung up on, and you just kind of ended with, I don't really know where to go with it?
That's really interesting. You know, we kind of have these random conversations. I mean, I sometimes will ask my dad specific questions about specific things
Hmm.
in the Bible that, I mean, less so now because I have no time for anything. But you know, when I used to like actually read stuff, I would ask him questions and we'd have some kind of mini discussions about things.
Hmm.
Um, so there have been times where, you know, like that has happened. I think my dad more so than not has like watched me interact with my children. So like he
Hmm.
was visiting the other day and Lila was asking me questions about hell and death and dying, and so I was kind of answering some of those
No
questions.
pressure. Jeez.
No pressure. Yeah, right. No pressure. And you know, he was there while she was asking them, and afterward he said, "Wow, it was like really cool to watch you navigate that."
Hmm.
So you know, there's been a lot of that. My dad sometimes will bring things to my attention. Like at the beach a couple years ago, he had just finished reading some book about quantum physics, and I don't remember which one it was. But we had this whole conversation about like quantum physics,
Hmm.
which isn't something that I would necessarily like dive into on my own, you know, because I'm usually like, I'm okay with not knowing some of that stuff, you know,
Sure.
but my dad loves it and is interested in it. And so like he brought it up and we were talking about it and it was a really good conversation. So I don't know if we talk as much about, you know, like where we fall on
Hmm.
certain things really. But we do have conversations often, um, about things. So, maybe I need to utilize that more. Maybe we need to talk more about where we fall on things.
I feel like I'd have him on speed dial.
So funny. So funny. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting though, because, you know, having my dad, you know, some of like part of, I think, having my dad be who he is,
Hmm.
um, for myself has been like finding my voice outside of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, realizing that like I respect my dad so much and there's a lot of things that I go to my dad for,
Hmm.
not just theology stuff, but like fixing my toilet and like a lot of things I go to my dad for, right?
Hmm.
But then who am I outside of that? What is my value to the deconstructing world and the faith world, and being able to find that? So there's a lot of things that I rely on my dad on, but then there's also a lot of things that I want to do for me, which he really respects, and I love that. So I was writing a
Hmm.
chapter for a book actually about deconstructing hell,
Hmm.
and I sent him the manuscript and I said, I want you to read this and I want your overall thoughts, but I don't want you to edit it.
Hmm.
Like I just want, that's what I want from you.
Hmm.
And he read it and he gave me his thoughts and it was really great. But being able to have like a little bit of separation at the same time has been really big and also like really empowering for me.
Hmm.
Because when you grow up with a parent who is very much like in the limelight for, you know, whatever it is, establishing your own spot, especially if you're in that like same kind of profession, has
Hmm.
been really huge for me. And my dad's
Yeah.
very supportive, you know, like he wants me to get out there and do my own thing, and which is great.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my follow-up question, was going to be about that very thing, about like standing. Do you ever feel like you're standing in the shadow kind of thing of like this Bible scholar? Because like you said,
Yeah.
it's, it could be very easy to be known as Pete En's daughter, when in
Yeah.
reality you're Liz Petters and you're
Right.
somebody who's doing similar work, but I think it's in a much, you're in the same arena, but you're playing like in a different area. Like you're doing
Right.
the same kind of thing, but you're bringing your own voice to it and stuff like that. So I've noticed just in watching you on social media and things like that, that your voice is very different than your father. So I was going to ask you, maybe you can even go a little bit deeper into it. Like, what
Yeah.
has it been like for you to, how have you developed that voice? Because there's a lot of people who are listening who are trying to find their voice and trying to utilize their voice in social media and things like that. So what does that process look like for you from the point where you're like, I think I'm going to do this podcast, to kind of where you are now, where you're talking about things, you're putting things out there, putting ideas out there, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it goes back a lot to like learning to love myself, what we
Hmm.
talked about earlier, right? And
Yep.
learning to trust myself, which is still such a battle. I'm not sitting here like I trust myself all the time. Like absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's really hard for me, but that has been huge. Like being able to trust my value as a person and being able to trust my voice and the things that I say has been really big. Um, but you know, I think noticing the differences between my dad and I, like you
Hmm.
said, I'm very empathetic. I'm very like kind and caring. Not that my dad is not kind and
Your
caring,
dad's
but
just
like
mean.
but he's horrible. But I'm like very, very like emotional, right? That's
Sure.
kind of like part of my thing.
Mhm.
So something that is so important to me is people finding like love and healing in this like new idea of God.
Mhm.
And my dad wants that too, but he's way more on like the academic side of
Yeah.
things, right? And so
Yeah.
we are very different. And I think for me, leaning into that, like leaning into who I am and what I want people to know, has been like really, really big for me. And also just being really vulnerable. Like people just
Mhm.
want to know the things, like they just
Yep.
really do. And
Yep.
they can pick out if you're just like putting things out there just to put things out there, and if you're being like really vulnerable or not. And so I try to be vulnerable. I mean, I don't really utilize like algorithms, and like I just don't, like that's great and wonderful, and Esther's really good at that, my co-host, but I just post things when I feel like it, and I
Yep.
just,
Me
I'm
too.
very like la la la, like this is how I'm feeling, but it works. It just works for me, and it's, that's what I want people to experience from me. So, but finding my own voice, like finding my own voice and finding who I am, and um it's tricky, but like leaning into myself, just like leaning into myself as much as possible.
Yeah. I think that's huge. I mean, I think just looking back on my own story, like it's, my voice was always insignificant. There's
Mm.
always there was always this encouragement to find your voice, but you can only use it within certain boundaries and certain confines. And once you kind of push those boundaries and explored outside of those areas, it was time to shut your voice down. And so that was kind of where was trying to I was in this world where like I didn't want to use my voice too much because then it's gonna like overpower God's voice and you're gonna be focused too much on you and what you think and what you want and things like that. But it took a while. Like it took a lot of I feel like soul work to kind of dig into myself and find that voice of like my inner child, so to speak, and call him out and say, like, it's okay to come out here and play. And it's okay to come out here and express your thoughts. Like your thoughts matter, your voice matters. And I think that the more I did that work, the more comfortable I became in doing some of the things that I do as
Yeah.
well. So it seems like we're on
Yeah.
a similar wavelength. But on that note, like what are your thoughts? One of the things I like to ask people who are deconstructing and rethinking things are what are your thoughts about like the two big things, Jesus and the Bible? So you talked about Jesus already, how Jesus is still
Mhm.
like a part of your life and just looks kind of differently than it used to look in the past. But kind of more specifically, like how does Jesus play into your day to day life these days? Like, do you pray to Jesus on a regular basis? Do you talk with Jesus on a regular basis? Like, how is that? How has your shift in theology shifted your relationship with him, if it's shifted at all?
Yeah. It's interesting. So Jesus and the idea of Jesus,
Yeah.
kind of saved my faith, right?
Mhm.
Not that I had to stay in my faith, right? I want to make that clear because people
Yeah.
don't, and I think that sometimes is the most healing journey for some people. Um, but that's kind of what kept me here. I love the idea of Jesus, like, and this idea of who he was as like a historical figure and some of the
Mhm.
things that we know about this historical figure.
Yeah.
And so a lot of like the way that I feel like I interact with Jesus is just sort of taking these like human characteristics, right,
Mhm.
that we read about, and trying to apply that to my own life,
Mhm.
which I just think is so, so powerful. And God to me feels like a little bit more foreign. Like you're sort of like, yeah, this sort of divine being. Like it's kind of weird, right, when you
Mhm.
think about it. But Jesus is tangible. I'm like, Jesus, this is somebody who like lived and breathed, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean? These are the things that Jesus did, which is really helpful for me. So I am not, I don't know if I would say that I pray sort of in like your typical way. It's a lot of
Mhm.
like begging and pleading with the air, right? For like peace, you know what I
Right.
mean? Or strength or like
Yeah.
those types of things. Um, so it's kind of this like frantic, like help, like a
Mhm.
lot of times, which to me has also been really healing, right? Just saying like, okay, I need you, I need you, I need you. I'm not expecting anything, but just give me some sort of something, some sort of peace, some sort of whatever. Um, but it's interesting when you go from a like theology, right? That Jesus is sort of like the center of everything. Jesus died for our sins and
Yeah.
all of these things. I have a lot of unanswered questions about Jesus that I'm fine with. I'm just kind of
Mhm.
like leaving in the background. Um, but what I do know about Jesus, what I have learned about Jesus, right, is that these characteristics that he had were very human and also like very, very honorable and admirable, and that Jesus was persecuted by the church, right?
Mhm.
And there's a piece of that that I think can be a really powerful learning tool as well, right? Like
Mhm.
Jesus was persecuted and killed,
Yeah.
and it doesn't necessarily have to be to save me from hell,
Mhm.
right? Like there can still be sort of this like hope in Jesus because of the way that he lived and died. And it can still be really powerful. Because I feel like one of the top questions that I get about Jesus and about hell is this idea of like, well, then who needs Jesus then if there's no hell?
Yep.
Like who needs
What's
Jesus?
the
And I'm like,
point, right?
well, I do. Like
Right.
I sure do, right? And I think when you kind of switch the way that you're thinking about things, anything can make sense,
Mhm.
right? So the way that I've shifted some of my thinking patterns has made Jesus more tangible and a little bit more like gentle. Like you kind of see
Mhm.
Jesus as sort of this like just this like guy that was just like doing his best, you know what I
Mhm.
mean? And really valued like his own emotional health, right? Just as much as he valued like the healing and safety of others.
Mhm.
And spent time in meditation and spent time like pushing back against some of the things of like the cultures of that day that were not okay, right? Like
Yeah.
just these really like tangible things that we can all be doing, which is just like this really wonderful example. So I think more often than not, I'm like, what would Jesus do? Like, those bracelets that we
It's
had,
like,
right?
really,
Like,
what would he do, right?
but like literally, what would Jesus do? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and what would Jesus care about? Would Jesus
Yeah.
care about purity culture? No.
Yeah.
No. Like, why are we wasting our time on that? You know what I mean? Like, just there's things that I feel like, um, so yeah, I don't know. That's kind of a long question, but being okay with not having answers about everything is like huge for me because there's a lot of stuff that I don't know and I'm never going to know and I don't need to argue about it on Facebook with people I don't know. So,
You mean you don't like to do that? That's
no. I don't love
not.
it. I don't love it.
But I love though that you're making, it's like making Jesus more human, because I think you could probably speak for yourself on this, but for me it was like growing up, he was God. He was human, of course, but he was God, and he came like to show us all the things that we're not, like, and
Yeah.
when you look at Jesus, you see all the ways you don't measure up, and therefore you know all the places you're falling short and all the things you have to repent of. And Jesus was just like this unattainable figure that I could never ever ever like
Mm,
measure up to. But the way you just described it, it's almost like putting Jesus on the same playing field as
yeah.
myself. Like you said, like he was a guy doing the best that he could. And the way that I've been trying to talk to Jordan, our daughter, about it, because we try to talk to her about Jesus and stuff too, even though we don't really talk to her about the Bible, is that like everybody was created in the image of God. Like we were all created good and perfect, and these wonderful little divine beings. But we go through life and we pick up baggage and we make mistakes and we forget who we are. We respond out of hatred instead of love, and we respond out of bitterness instead of forgiveness. And God kind of send Jesus to remind us, of who we really are. So when we look at Jesus, we're like, oh yeah, like that's who I am. And it kind of encourages us or pushes us, to be more like him. And I think that, like, when you look at him, if you put that humanity back on Jesus, I think that changes the whole game.
Totally. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree.
All right. So what about the Bible? Let's talk about the Bible for a second, because
Great.
the Bible is, I don't know, like there's some people who deconstruct and start asking questions and they just throw the whole Bible away. Like, I can't read this anymore. And I did that for a while. For like 6 months, I didn't read the Bible because I was like, I can't pick this thing up and read it in any other way than the way that I was taught to read it. Like, it's just too much for me. And so I put it away. And some people put it away, they never go back to it. Some people continue to read it every day, like have their own devotions kind of thing, but look at it through like a different light. Like, where does the Bible fit into your life on a regular basis? I know you said you don't talk to your kids about it. Do you
Hmm.
still talk about it to yourself?
Yeah, I'm pretty out on the Bible right now.
Hmm.
I love the idea of the Bible. I
Yeah.
do. I really love it. I don't know, you've probably read Inspired by Rachel Held Evans.
Yeah.
Great book,
Yeah.
like really speaks to me, right? So I
Hmm.
love this idea of the Bible. And I actually am like working on some children's books about the Bible.
Oh, cool.
um, So I do love the idea of it. Reading it for myself in the ways that I used to read the Bible is
Yeah.
incredibly triggering for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember like being probably like 15 years old on my bed, like ripping through the Bible, trying to find verses that were going to tell me that I was going to be okay.
Mhm.
And I still have my Bible that I had like from the, during that time. And it's sad. It's very sad for me. So
Mhm.
reading the Bible myself is, I'm not ready for that. Um, so I have a study Bible, I have a Bible, I have them like they're on my shelf. They're kind of hanging out there,
Mhm.
they're like, "Hey, you can open me if you want, or you don't have to." Um, so I would love to get to a place where I can read the Bible again because I
Mhm.
just really think it's just this beautiful, amazing um just collection of stories and wonderings and sadness and joy. Like it really is this like beautiful cultural picture,
Mhm.
of so much. And so I love the idea of it, but I also need to like respect and honor my own boundaries and say, listen, like I'm not there right
Mhm.
now. I'm just not. So that's kind of where I am on the Bible. I don't mind talking about it.
Mhm.
And again, I think there's like some really beautiful things to be taken out of like, who Jesus is and what we are learning about Jesus from the Bible. And so those are things that I want to kind of like give to my children in a
Mhm.
very like age appropriate, helpful way, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not reading the Bible right now, and I don't have an interest in doing that right now.
Yeah. I think that's good. I mean, and I think it's important for people to hear that because a lot of times that approach can carry with it, I think, a lot of guilt for people
Hmm.
because you were taught your whole life that the Bible is the word of God and it's this divine, it's like the fourth member of the Trinity. For some people it's like the third because they don't know what to do with the Holy Spirit. So it's like the Bible is like this tangible thing that you can look at and you can read and it's God speaking to you. And so I think when you start to rethink things, I know for me, there was like a lot of guilt to put that away. Like I put it on my shelf, like I said, for like 6 months. And
Hmm.
so many times I wanted to go back to it, not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to. Because I'm like, oh my
Right.
goodness, like I haven't read my Bible in a month. And so, what does that mean about my faith? Like, is my faith crumbling? What does it mean? But I think that once I put the Bible away, maybe maybe you're getting this sense too. I don't know. But it was almost like I started to hear God's voice in other ways. Like I felt like
Hmm.
I was able to sense God more in my spouse, able to sense God more speaking to me through my own child or through nature, whatever, when I wasn't always having my head in a book.
Yeah, I feel like God kind of finds this way of,
Mhm.
finding us, really, and that sounds a little creepy, but he just kind of finds this way of seeping into our regular life. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think when we're so set on like finding our faith in these very specific ways, right? Like church or the Bible, and
Yep.
like there's nothing wrong with that if that's
Yep.
where you are in your journey, right?
Mhm.
But when we're so set on that, we miss these like other places and we miss kind of like this daily journey that we have that the Holy Spirit sort of seeps into. And so I
Yeah.
really agree with you. I think there's been so much healing in me, like, for me in leaving the church, not reading my Bible, just kind of starting from the very beginning and saying to myself, okay, what do I want my faith to look like?
Mhm.
How does God speak to me?
Yep.
And what feels good for me, right? And digging up trauma by reading my Bible, I don't think that God wants that for me at all,
Yeah.
right? So just being able to trust that like God is good and faithful and loving and that I can make decisions based on what I feel like I need and that is good and okay.
Yeah.
But I never had like you never have that message, and so it's a hard journey, but like that's huge and really really important. Being able to say like what do I want? What do I need? What feels good for me? And then being able to have faith that God is okay with that.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. So last question for you. What's one of the bigger things that was hard for you to rethink? Like was there a particular topic, a particular doctrine, a particular theology, a particular thing that like you wrestled with maybe more than any of the others? And then what were some resources that helped you? And I asked that because there's a lot of people who reach out to me who say like I'm really hung up on this, I'm really hung up on that. Like I feel like I need to have an answer
Mm.
for what to do with this particular topic. And so I'm wondering if you could just share like a piece of what that has looked like for you in hopes that it would help somebody who's listening.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me has been this idea of, God healing or not healing, right?
Hmm.
Or God saving us from hardship or not saving us from hardship and what that looks like. And that for me has been really scary. And I
Hmm.
sometimes will say, like, I have a group of friends, we're in a book club together. We talk a lot about deconstructing stuff. And sometimes I'll just send a text and I'll say, I really wish I could just pray to God and believe that He was going to take this away from me. Because there were for so long
You
there was
missed
that
that,
sort of
right?
illusion of control, right? Where you were like,
Yeah.
well, I'll pray and God will take it away from me if he feels like he should. And there's this illusion of control. But
Yeah.
now hard things happen. And I'm like, I don't really know what to do with this.
Hmm.
And you're just kind of sitting in it, and which is very uncomfortable. And that's been really difficult for me. That's probably been like the biggest like theological shift
Hmm.
that I struggle with still, I think, daily, or at least weekly. Um, what do I do with pain, and where is God in my pain if
Hmm.
not there to save me from it?
Yeah.
And there's something to be said about the peace that passes understanding. I've
Yeah.
felt that in like really intense moments of my life where I'm like, I should not be okay, and yet I
Mm.
feel this sense of peace. But coming to terms with the fact that like we are going to suffer in life and God isn't going to save us from suffering sucks.
Yeah.
Like it really sucks, like
Yeah.
wow, we could really struggle our entire lives with certain things, and have moments, right? Moments where someone shows up with coffee, or there's like these sort of glimpses and beautiful moments where I feel God's presence, but it's not like this guy riding in on like a white horse to like slay the enemies. Like that's just not what it looks like, but that was the story that I got. One of the books that was hugely helpful for me was God Can't by Thomas Ord.
Mm.
Because just he offers kind of this like other perspective of like, okay, like what if God really like maybe can't do some of the things that we
Mm.
thought he could, and not because he's not powerful, but because he is, like so you gotta read it. You gotta
Yeah.
read it. But it was very helpful for me
Hmm.
because I only knew one perspective. And so I just
Yeah.
wasn't really able to make sense of how it could be any other way, and so just having that to lean into was helpful, but that's definitely been the biggest one for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that you like this is an ongoing thing. It's not like something that you dug into one night and you figured it out after you read a book. Like it's an ongoing process, and sometimes you need to learn to sit in the discomfort of it and
Yeah.
get to a point where you almost like I think befriend the discomfort. Like it just becomes part of your experience as you're thinking through these things. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's something that I'm gonna do. I mean, this is my entire life, I think, right? Like my
Yeah.
entire life you're gonna have these
Yeah.
scenarios that pop up that you're like, I don't know like how to do this, and I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm going to survive this, right? Like
Yeah.
so we're going to have these our entire life. So kind of one day I was like, all right, well I better like start getting used to navigating this because this is life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's something really empowering about that, I think. No one wants to suffer, but there's something
Yeah.
really empowering about saying, okay, we're going to suffer. That's what
Yeah.
happens in life,
Yeah.
right? And there's no way to avoid suffering. No one's been able to do it as of yet that I know of.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate it? And what do we do with it? But I mean, I think I battle it often,
Mhm.
I really do. And I think for people who have mental health struggles, especially, um, you really want an answer, and you really
Yeah.
want a fix, right?
Yeah.
And so it can be hard to realize that that might not be true, and I mean
Yeah.
people for any kind of chronic health issues or any kind of pain that you're in, it's like you just want an answer, you want something to be fixed.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I know for me, like I miss. There's part of me that misses that initial kind of gut reaction to go right to prayer because I'm
Yeah.
going to go to my knees and I'm going to pray this out and I'm going to storm the gates of heaven with my prayers and I'm going to keep on pounding on those gates and eventually, the gate will open and things will get better. And like I remember when like I no longer when I started to like shift my thinking that I'm like, well now what do I do? Like if I don't
Mhm.
have if that's not my first reaction, like if I'm really going to believe that, I don't know if God can do those kind of things and like now what do I do? And
Right.
there was that like I really missed that comfort, but at the same time, to your point, there was a part of the discomfort that almost felt comforting because it felt like, well, this is humanity, this is life, right? And like we're all in this together, like we're all experiencing the same thing. And maybe instead of God, storming in to make it all better, maybe God's just sitting here with me in my pain, and I'm not
Right.
alone. And there's something
Yeah.
comforting about that.
Yeah, I've shifted the way that I pray, I think,
Yeah.
when I pray, if we're calling it that. And it's a lot more like help me do this instead of like do this for me, you
Yeah.
know? It's a lot of like, hey, I'm really struggling. Like I need some sort of like direction. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know what that means, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of scientific research out there, that talks a lot about like energy shifts and
Yeah.
right, like there might be something to good vibes, and
Hmm.
like how we're kind of transferring energy to each other. But I do a lot of like just praying shift in brain neurons
Hmm.
basically, and like I have a friend who just had surgery yesterday and is just like in a lot of pain, and praying like peace over her,
Hmm.
right? And I sometimes I just breathe for other people. I just sit in my bed and I just breathe in and out in the direction of someone's being, right?
Yeah.
So there's sort of like little like meditative tools that I do that in many ways is prayer, right? It just looks so different from how it used to be. And I don't know if it changes anything, but I know that it gives me a sense of connection to God and myself and other people. And that can't be wrong.
Yeah.
So,
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, hey, we're just about out of time, but this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for taking the time to join me. Thank you for your work, and thanks for everything you do.
yeah, thanks for having me. Love it. It's been really
Yeah,
fun.
and real quick, where I'll put your link to your podcast in the show notes. But where can people go online to interact with you and anything that you're putting out there?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram, Liz Petters, the Deconstructed Mama, and on Facebook as the same. My website is elizabethpetters.com. But yeah, I'm mostly on Facebook and Instagram. It's where I can quickly post my thoughts and feelings while my kids are hanging all over me. So you can find me
On the
there.
go.
On the go, like quick, let me get this idea out. Yeah.
Exactly. Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, love it. Thanks.
Thanks, Liz.